I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Moray. He goes all the way back to 1984 when these first conferences were coming together, and he's always had good stuff to say. He's got one of the sharpest mathematical minds on the planet. He's spoken at nearly every conference since then, I think. I can't think of a year we didn't see him, and he's always worth listening to. Moray King, he's an electrical engineer and a systems engineer. He's got 3 books out. These are 2 of them, Tapping Zero-Point Energy, The Energy Machine of T. Henry Moray. They're available through the bookstore here, and also The Quest for Zero-Point Energy. So let's welcome Moray King.
Thank you very much. Ever since I researched zero-point energy, starting in the 70s, and I learned about inventors and suppression and everything else like that, I thought the only way to breach this out to the world is to have a device that's so easy to replicate that everybody could do it, it could never be suppressed, and that's always been my dream. And what's happened is, I think, on the course of my research, this dream came true, actually already happened, in a most peculiar way. You know those electrolyzers, everybody's excited about the boosters, Brown's gas, HHO, we've probably all heard of them. When I first heard of those, this is back in the 80s, I think Andrew McCroskey gave a talk on Brown's gas, and I was kind of miffed. I thought, gee, some nerd at a Tesla conference, him talking about something standard. I thought it was just a standard electrolyzer. And I said, you know, we're supposed to be talking about zero-point energy and flying saucers, and you're going to give this conference at bad reputation. So, it wasn't until I heard a talk in 2006 that where they talked about the highly anomalous nature of the gas that I started researching. I gave my first talk in 2007. And I picked this device ever since then as the best device for massive replication. Because the paradigm shift that occurred to me as I did the research is this is not hydrogen. The primary energy behind this device is not necessarily hydrogen. And this was quite a shift because everything I'm reading it says it's hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen. So I'd like to propose the hypothesis that what we're actually making is charged water gas clusters activated and coherent to zero-point energy. And in fact, I go as far to say is we actually do not want hydrogen. And when I shift my consciousness this way, it becomes very apparent there's other things that we can do to actually amplify the energy in these experiments. And that's what I'd like to share. Basically, the energy is not hydrogen. It comes from charged water gas clusters that activate and cohere to zero-point energy. And we can increase the energy content by vortex circulation, and even motivates recycling the exhaust water because we didn't deplete all the energy in the clusters just because we took it through the engine. And the whole goal, of course, is to prove in the simplest possible way that we actually discovered a new energy source. These projects are extremely popular. There's blogs and sites with hits all over the map. The dots represent people of interest making hits. You notice pretty much everybody's interested unless you live in the desert. HHO games formed up in Florida, very, very popular. They have like a swap meet every 6 months. Thousands of people show up under a big tent and are playing around and showing off their stuff. You Google, go to YouTube and search for water fuel, that phrase. You get over 42,000 videos. Shortly after I made my first presentation in 2007, Sterling Allen made this video that in 2 minutes summarizes up all the main points, and I'd like to play it. John, I want this time back. Can you work it? You want to turn on my video? Oh, where's John? This is injury time. I get this back at the end.
While academia has been spurning the topic, hundreds if not thousands of hobbyists and independent investigators worldwide are working on various electrolysis-like projects which put out more energy than was required to run the electrolysis unit. These pursuits go by various names such as Brown's gas and water fuel cells, and have various heroes such as the late Stanley Meyer and more recently John Kansas, who is burning salt water using radio frequencies. A number of commercial interests are involved in the research and development of the various approaches as well. The famous 19th century scientist Michael Faraday defined the limit of output energy possible in any standard electrolysis scenario. It is well known in thermodynamics that it takes more energy to dissociate water into hydrogen and oxygen than can be returned when the hydrogen is burned. But these rogue experimenters of today are reporting output from their setups that exceed Faraday's limit many times over, claiming 7 times, 10 times, or even more, producing as much as 1 liter of gas per hour using just a half a watt of electricity. The factors that seem to contribute to these effects include using a large number of stainless plates close together, the plates rough to facilitate releasing the bubbles, driving the cell using square waves, pulsed DC at kilohertz frequencies, and constantly modifying frequency to optimize gas production. Moray, who has published 3 seminal books on zero-point energy, recently put forth a scientific model in which he suggests that the excess energy being observed in these unusual electrolysis setups comes from the zero-point energy by reducing charged water gas clusters, which somehow achieve a self-organizing criticality that coherently activates and absorbs zero-point energy. The experimental setups are typically rather simple, which is leading to a proliferation of the number of people reproducing and working to improve the effect and its consistency to the point where it can be used to serve as a practical primary energy source, an energy generator that could operate anywhere there is water. Zero-point energy is everywhere in the universe. It is the foundation of the fabric of space. Other groups, such as exogen technologies, are using these processes to purify water. These energy sources could actually produce culinary water as a byproduct. The day of water power via zero-point energy is arriving. Welcome to the future.
There's many names for the gas. Brown's gas is most famous, and perhaps it's the best name because Yul Brown investigated the anomalous nature of the gas and how much energy it had. Most people believe it's simply a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. Brown attempted to explain it by saying it was atomic hydrogen and oxygen, because that's what HHO stands for. Other names are hydroxy and oxyhydrogen. George Weissman called it electrically expanded water, and I'm kind of on the same page with him because the energy is really in the water, and I'm calling it charged water gas clusters. And we'll see it's wide open for other names as different inventors discovered it's really not hydrogen, and then they end up naming the gas after themselves. Typical electrolyzers have parallel plates. Many commercial units are out now. Machine shops are getting involved. Best is a big manufacturing of these out of Korea, probably the biggest company in the world doing this. We have machine and mold shops in the United States doing it. Here's a remake of the Bob Boyce to his specification, his device. Other materials have been tried, mixed metal oxide titanium cell with pretty good results. The Anton cell out of Germany will feature that, has 1 millimeter gaps, very tight spacing. Energy Builders Network is here in the United States. Some engineers and technicians got together, 18 of them said, hey, let's make a company and offer equipment for sale to the researchers of the world. So they have switching amplifiers, pulse wave modulators, computer controllers, and they sell electrolyzer kits. But where are they? They have a few YouTubes left, but all the business sites that they mention are gone. Denny Klein had a great news feature on him that quickly summarizes the strange nature of Brown's gas, so I'm going to play that. John?
Feels only slightly warm to the touch. But watch what happens when he touches anything else.
Instantaneously, I can burn a hole right down through the center of that lip.
The flame instantly turns hotter than the surface of the sun. Heat so intense it takes only seconds to literally burn a hole through charcoal. 3 seconds turns a brass ball to glowing liquid metal. Tungsten lights up like a sparkler. Steel, lead, and other metals slices on contact. Yet the tip of the welder stays cool to the touch.
No other gas will do this.
Denny Klein uses an alternative fuel source once thought impossible. He says people still have trouble believing him when he reveals his liquid fuel.
Water. Take water and electricity, and we break it down through our very unique electrolysis process.
Klein has just patented his process of converting H2O to HHO, producing a gas that combines the atomic power of hydrogen with the chemical stability of water.
It turns right back to water. You see the water running off of it.
Klein originally designed his water-burning engine for cutting metal. Thought his invention would replace volatile acetylene in welding factories. And then one day, as he drove to his laboratory in Clearwater, he thought of another way to burn his HHO gas.
On a 100-mile trip, we use about 4 ounces of water.
Klein says his prototype 1994 Ford Escort can travel exclusively on water, but he currently has it rigged to run as a water and gasoline hybrid.
Simply speaking, we can change the world by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels.
These are equivalent to our...
Pete Dominisi is helping Klein take his hydrogen technology patents from a 2-room office in Clearwater to consumer markets around the world.
You know what? Microsoft came out of nowhere, came out of the garage. Why not hydrogen technologies?
The duo is already in negotiations with one U.S. automaker and the U.S. government. Their plans have grown from basing welding with water to powering the entire world from the safest and cleanest fuel on Earth. Greg Patrick, Fox News.
Members of Congress recently invited Denny Klein to Washington to demonstrate his technology. Now his company is currently developing a hover for the U.S. military that can run on both water and gasoline. So far, his water-powered engines have passed all performance safety inspections. So all systems appear to be go right now. Gives you meaning to the term running water.
You just have to hope the water prices don't go up.
Radio station moved a repeater to in a building close to us, within about 400 yards of us, and so every so often we get a little bit of radio that RF that manages to attract itself to any antenna, and that includes metal or whatever. I'll have to ask you for your patience in advance, because every so often you're going to hear a little bit of that. We've actually, I don't know if you noticed, but we changed all of our cables, did double shielding, and we're still getting a little bit of it from time to time. I apologize for that. We are trying. We called over. They won't listen to us. They've got an FCC permit, so we just got to eat it in the meantime. But I apologize for the disruption.
We got the solution. Just up our power. Let's just give it right back to them.
Hey, we put some induction coils on there. We can use all their useful RF and power the hotel.
Nearly everyone believes the energy is from hydrogen. Here we're going to suggest that it's not. That the primary, and I'm going to use the big anomalies around Brown's gas. It's a cool flame, yet it can vaporize tungsten. Burning hydrogen cannot do that. It alters radioactivity and radioactive substances, and has even been known to cause transmutation. Well, burning hydrogen certainly can't do that. Furthermore, laboratory analysis that have been done recently at Idaho State University find very little hydrogen in the gas, and what they find is mostly gaseous charged water clusters with some excess electrons. We're going to suggest that the source of all this energy is from the zero-point energy, because the charged water gas clusters are very similar to the plasma charged clusters, which are a microscopic form of ball lightning studied by Ken Shoulders. And that was my background. I was studying the anomalies of these, that he calls EVs for electron volittum, or EVOs for exotic vacuum objects. And there's another cluster that's quite similar, that's anomalously energetic, and that's inert gas clusters. that's behind the energy source in the famous PAP engine, working with just clusters of inert gas. The clusters retain the energy, and just like black EVs, Ken Shoulders found that his plasma charge clusters could go dark, but he could reactivate them. And this motivates recycling the exhaust water, implying that the energy content in the water is still there, even after it has been taken through the engine. Clusters are like Rydberg matter. This is a form of cold plasma where the electrons are at higher orbitals and they're shared amongst all the ions. It's like a plasma form of a quasi-metal. It's well known in chemistry to exist, and it's a way of storing energy in a cluster. So therefore, there are three types of clusters: the plasma charge clusters, the inert gas clusters, and the charged water gas clusters. All manifest excessive energy. And I'll cite a reference that shows how zero-point energy coupling can occur via cavity quantum electrodynamics. To get a net energy gain out of the electrolyzer, things have simplified down. There's two very, very important things that have to be done. Number one is the electrode has to be properly conditioned to be a great emitting surface. It seems that a rough, sharp, pointy, microscopically pointy type surface, others have found they can get a white powdery layer forming. We're not sure what it is because it hasn't been measured yet. And also to have a small gap between the electrodes, because what this does is allow you to lose less electrolyte or even no electrolyte. We want to work at low current so we can work at low power. And either DC or pulse DC seems to produce the effect. It was observed in Brown's gas devices. There are three types of bubbles. Hydrogen on the negative electrode and oxygen on the positive electrode. Those we understand from standard electrolysis. But there was a middle set of bubbles. And some researchers called these the magic ether bubbles. And I think it's those set of bubbles are what comprise the charged water gas clusters. If we make a very tight gap, all the atoms tend to participate in the clusters, and thus we get less hydrogen, less oxygen, and more of the charged water gas clusters. The microscopic surface on a tight gap, if you were in low vacuum, would tend to produce sparks if you added voltage across it. We're looking for a discharge mode to launch them, because that's what we do when we launch the plasma charge clusters. And we don't want to draw a lot of current. So if you were thinking hydrogen, you would say, oh, we want a lot of current because I need an electron for every hydrogen atom that I make. But we're not trying to make hydrogen. We're trying to activate these clusters from the zero-point energy. So we actually want to cut back our input power and work in a discharge mode. The enhancements include pulse wave modulation, modulating the square waves that are driving it, mechanical vibrations, and sonic and ultrasonic have been tried with beneficial effects. And we're going to add to it, the mix is a vortex motion is helpful, and of course recycling. The goal is to minimize the input power and maximize the gas production in order to produce a closed loop self-running system. This is the demonstration to the world that you really have a new energy source. Basically, the electrolyzer provides us the gas that runs the genset, the motor generator. You rectify the output energy onto a storage capacitor. Then it have switching regulator electronics so that the pulse driving circuit sees a uniform DC voltage to keep driving it. If this system can even idle, just idling is a grand slam home run, because it's well known that the motor is typically only 20% efficient. So if you've got a closed loop system where you can kickstart it with a battery, if you want, and you can have this run indefinitely, you have proven to the world that you have a new energy source. Two teams have announced closed loop success this year. Steve Eaton and Jeff Sokol did it in November last year, and Oliver and Valentine out of Germany just announced it this year, and I'll be featuring these projects in this talk. Also featured are these names. You recognize these names? I'd like to give a special kudos to Patrick Kelly. He's out of Great Britain. He has published on the web an ebook that is extremely clear. He interviews inventors, he writes clearly, writes lots of diagrams, and it's a great source material if you want to do the research. So the energy gain is not from hydrogen. It's well known that electrolysis cannot yield a net energy gain from standard thermodynamics. It simply costs you more energy to break apart the water than you get back when you burn the hydrogen. Another way of looking at it is water is in a low energy state, And if you have to put in energy in to get hydrogen, diatomic hydrogen, but you have to put more energy in to get atomic hydrogen. And if you want to get it all the way up to plasma, you have to put more energy in still. This is an energy-losing sequence. Furthermore, there's standard proofs on the YouTube and everything else on the web that shows it can't be done with its hydrogen because at normal atmospheric pressure, you're getting a few liters per minute is very little hydrogen. So if it was only hydrogen trying to produce the boost, it would be less than 1% of the energy content. And that's why the scientific community is arguing against it. And he's saying it's pure fraud, anybody who claims it. Well, the resolution of the fraud is it's not hydrogen. It's something much, much better. Furthermore, at uncompressed hydrogen, you would need 300 to 500 liters per minute just to run a car. So what's the energy source? It's the energetic vacuum. You've heard of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics. There's this underlying jitter to everything. Dirac found it was coming from the fabric of space itself, that there was underlying electromagnetic field energy like microscopic lightning always interacting with everything, causing a jitter. Here, electron-positron pairs can pop out of the vacuum and then immediately disappear. There's much literature on zero-point energy in the journals. You get very little in the textbooks, but in the journals, like the Physical Review, which is our most prestigious journal in the United States, they're showing how the zero-point energy can give rise to quantum effects, how it can stabilize the hydrogen atom, how it can be an energy source without violating thermodynamics. It can also be the source of gravity and inertia. An inertia paper produced a lot of excitement because it implied that we, in our science, in principle, has the theory to allow inertial drive, the ability to rapidly accelerate like a hairpin turn without feeling the inertial stress. The zero-point energy can be modeled as a turbulent plasma. This is a better model for the ether than the standard liquid model because it basically has two sets of charges. And they call it the quantum foam, and it's basically electric flux entering and leaving our three-dimensional space. These holes where it enters and leaves is on the order of the Planck length, 10 to the minus 33rd centimeters. That's 20 orders of magnitude smaller than the electron. The key question is, can self-organization be triggered in the quantum foam? When I asked this to the physicists in the 70s, they said, no, it's entropy, it's chaotic, it's random in its motion. Random things must forever remain random. But in 1977, Ilya Prigogine wins the Nobel Prize in chemistry for identifying under certain conditions self-organization may occur. These conditions are expressed in general systems terms, and the conditions must be nonlinear, far from equilibrium, and have an energy flux through it. And it turns out that under certain conditions, the zero-point energy can be triggered. They fulfill those conditions and can be triggered into self-organizational forms. Now, the zero-point energy can be modeled as a flux from a higher dimensional space. Pretend that slot is the flatland slot, represents our three-dimensional space. As the flux comes through, it's on the left, it's the incoherent vacuum fluctuations that are observed. If there's a tilt to it as it comes through, there's a component aligned in our space. We say the vacuum's polarized. If there's vorticity as it comes through, it's in a spin, we would detect that as an elementary particle. This is Wheeler's theory of geometric dynamics. Basically, the elementary particle is like a whirlpool. The flow of the river is like the zero-point energy flux, and it must maintain the whirlpool consistently, which means every elementary particle owes its existence to the zero-point flux, which means everything owes its existence to zero-point energy. I should run it out. Everything emerges from self-organized collectives. Robert Lachlan just published this book a couple years ago. He's a Nobel Prize winner, and he's on the same page, that everything, including the laws of physics, arise because of self-organization from microscopic collectives. So the principles for cohering the zero-point energy is work with a highly nonlinear system, like a plasma, abruptly drive it far from equilibrium of any type of abrupt pulsing or abrupt discharge, and maximize the zero-point energy interaction using ions and vortex forms, and I'll be featuring vortex forms later in this talk. The vacuum polarization of a conduction band electron clouds. This is the electrons in normal everyday conductors and our normal everyday electrical circuitry. It's an equilibrium with the zero-point fluctuations. Therefore, that's why we don't see any net energy gains in standard electrical circuits. However, the vacuum polarization description for the ions, or the nucleus of the ions, is steep lines of polarization converging, which means that abrupt motion of ions is an activator of the zero-point energy. They see it in the heavy ion collision experiments. They call them exotic coherent vacuum states in quantum electrodynamics. When you oscillate a lot of ions together in a plasma, it's called the plasma ion acoustic mode, and it's well known to exhibit energetic anomalies. These anomalies include large radiant energy absorption, high-frequency spikes, runaway electrons, and plasma heating, and they associate the anomaly with an organized form that the plasma went into. And it typically goes into the form of a vortex ring. This is a model for ball lightning. It's also a model for elementary charges arising from self-organization in the quantum foam. Everything, when we look at self-organization in plasmas, we can use the same analogy that says self-organization in the virtual plasma of the quantum foam. They're related, and you can use that as a clue to what to do to activate zero-point energy. The vortex ring closes on itself, and it exhibits a force-free vortex which yields a natural stability. Ken Shoulders launches a microscopic form of these ball lightnings. He calls electron volidum with a small capacitor. He knows the charge. He does an abrupt discharge, and he can see the little EV come off. And they damage the witness plate, and he can measure and study the content. He can make the big ones, but he found out that the EMP that comes off of them when they hit a conductor is so great that he fries his electronic equipment in the lab, so he doesn't want to play with them. I measured them. Their charge seems to be on the order of 10 to the 11th electrons. They seem to have about 10 to the 6th ions. Their charge and mass ratio always seems to be like the electron, and he's shown they contained excessive energy. They form into chains, or this could be a decay of a bigger vortex ring. He's detected positive ones that are not collections of positrons. The charge and mass ratio is like the positron. They deflect like they're positively charged. So he is getting on to the nature of how do I make something self-organized, like creating charge from the clay of the quantum foam. It's actually charge creation of a positive charge. He makes dual EVs, where they circulate around each other in a helix, and when they strike the plate, he strikes the tube. By the way, these slides will be available. I'll tell you how to get them at the end of the talk. These slides are on the web, and I'll tell you how to get them. Very importantly to this talk, he makes black EVs. That means they go dark in the middle region there, and he only needs an electric pulse to reactivate them back to energetic phenomena. The charge cluster anomalies summarized. They adhere to dielectrics. Many can clump in a necklace formation. They bore holes in high melting point ceramics, and they do not do it with heat. It's a much more coherent form of energy. It makes it appear that it disrupts the electron bonds, and it looks like melting, but this is not due to heat. He also has experiments where he does element transmutation as well as radioactivity reduction if he transmutes a radioactive nucleus. Charged clusters and charged water gas clusters exhibit the same anomalies. This was the big clue that convinced me that we're really working with the zero-point energy phenomena here. George Weissman's website is this. He has lots of information on Brown's gas. In a summary, it adheres to matter. It's electrically polarized. When it implodes, it gives off an electric shock. We'll see there's a cool flame, yet it can vaporize tungsten. It can pretty well cut through anything, and there's claims of neutralizing radioactive waste and claims of element transmutations. The same phenomena that occurs in Brown's gas was occurring in Ken Shoulders' studies of EVs. Has a cool flame. John. This is the demo of passing your hand through the flame. Three in a row real fast here. No, we're going to play the next one immediately. Just go to, let me hit the next slide. Leave that up. Just hit the slide. Okay, now play this one. Doesn't boil water. That's because it is water. Play the next one, the next slide. yet it can vaporize tungsten. Look at those temperatures. This is Yule Brown.
About 3,600. Okay. That's electrodes, okay? So, this stuff costs us very much. It's working for 3,900 Celsius. That's so you make. So will make me, it turns into what vapor. That's what you make from the 5,960 today. So make it 5,960 degrees Celsius. Yeah. And now, the second part about was suggested, we need 600 degrees. Yes. I will apply and you will notice the last step Please note, do not breathe tungsten vapor. These numbers today on the 6,000
Look at that temperature. Here's a summary of the temperature. There's what it takes to melt and vaporize tungsten. Look at the Brown's gas temperature. It's incredibly low. The standard welding torches can't reach the temperature to sublimate tungsten. And the hydrogen arc torch is one of the best ones, and that's a hydrogen plasma. And that can't even compete with Brown's gas. We have a totally coherent form of energy. It's not heat. Chris Ekman, who spoke last year, made measurements with the staff up at Idaho State University, and as they measured the Brown's gas, they found out there was very little hydrogen, neither monatomic or diatomic. What they found was mostly gaseous water with excess electrons, and they measured the low temperature. They also got some preliminary evidence of a linear water molecule in the heart of the cluster. A linear would have had excess electrons on it. So he suggests it's the heart of Rydberg matter. We have the electrons in a higher state, so Chris Ekman is using the same model with charged water gas clusters. Stewart and Gourley found the means to extract the pure form of the water gas, and when they recognized it was not hydrogen, they named it after themselves. They call it SG gas. When they dissolve it in water and then they freeze it, you can see the gas starts to form that spiral as it comes out of the water. They can store the pure gas under pressure. You can't do that with hydrogen and oxygen mix. That would be very dangerous. And they sneer at Brown's gas, saying it's been contaminated with hydrogen. The way they did it was they separated out the plates and they just harvested the middle set of bubbles. That's all they did. This was an energy-losing proposition for them. They weren't trying for net energy gain because in order to separate the plates, they had to put a lot of electrolyte and draw a lot of current. But nonetheless, they were able to get the pure gas to study it, so they made a valuable contribution. Water clusters are well known around the world. This is probably one of the best websites for water references coming out of England. Clathrates are trapping gas in the cluster itself. MIT site has water buckyballs. And in the standard literature, studying water clusters, there it is. There's the form of brown gas. They call it hydrated electrons, and it has negatively charged water clusters that have the charge in the interior, which puzzles them how that can be. And it aggregates between liquid, water, and steam. They have not connected this to Brown's gas. They just have studied it. But there it is in the standard literature. Cavity quantum electrodynamics was used to explain how water could possibly interact with the zero-point energy. And from one paper by T.V. Perlinslik, he explained how steam electricity, waterfall ionization, thundercloud charge separation, and sonoluminescence can occur from the same model. If he's right, that means that the source of lightning is actually the zero-point energy. His model was basically this. In bubble cavity quantum electrodynamics, the zero-point energy is activated when the bubble wall collapses. It causes a continuously increasing resonant frequency in the standing wave that acts like an ultraviolet to X-ray laser, which coincides with the dissociation frequency of the water molecule. So it's one of the best references linking zero-point energy to water clustering. Well, the water fuel projects form into three classes. Boosters, by far the most popular. They improve miles per gallon, the gas mileage. There's some systems that run completely on water, and then if you want to prove you have a new energy source, you have to make it self-running by disconnecting the battery. The pure water fuel projects have an interesting history. Starts back with Charles Garrett in 1935. He patented an electrolytic carburetor, and there was newspaper accounts of him driving a car in the Houston area just on water, and he's also the inventor of the traffic signal. William Rhodes is credited to be the modern inventor of the parallel plate capacitor. He personally believed it was just hydrogen and oxygen, nothing special. It was Yule Brown who discovered this gas is very, very special, and it was highly anomalous in its energy content. And perhaps it's best to name it after him because he did those investigations that discovered we have something remarkable here. Archie Blue is working in the 70s. He found he does really well if he blows holes through the electrolyzer as he electrolyzes. Blows air through the holes that are punched in the plates. Bob Boyce did a tremendous contribution. He shared his information with everyone on the web. He made dry cell, which means the water can't go from chamber to chamber. Because of Bob Boyce's contribution, the entire science has come up a whole plateau as far as the replication of has occurred worldwide. And because he's with us in the audience today, I'd like to give him a round of applause for his contribution. Thank you, Bob. Stan Meyer's perhaps the most famous because he got a ton of publicity, right? He has the dune buggy running on. There's a documentary, it runs on water, narrated by Arthur Clarke. You can see snippets of it on YouTube. He's murdered, 1998. The story was dug up, an investigation of the murder by an investigative reporter, and he was poisoned in a restaurant while celebrating a verbal agreement with two Belgian investors. They would make their factory to retrofit cars to run on water. And there are audio tapes of dozens of witnesses, but the audio tapes of the two Belgian investors are mysteriously missing. However, his twin brother, Steve Meyer, is still alive. He was the electronics genius behind Stan. He's an electrical engineer, is quite good. He has a patent, but he's very reclusive, does not wish to participate publicly in any way. However, the family saga continues with the founding of Exogen Power. Shortly after Stan's death, Exogen Power started up. The chief investigator and engineer, electrical engineer, was Stephen Barry Chambers. Stephen Barry Chambers' sister is Marilyn Chambers. Marilyn Chambers was the wife of Stan Myers. She brought the information to Stephen, and he founded Exogen. He has 3 patents, pretty well all the same. And he did a very good job as an electrical engineer, succeeding, making a very good electrolyzer. He worked with a very tight spacing, 40 stainless steel plates. He explored the region of driving with square waves. That's what he explored, all the way up to 250 kilohertz. And he could find a place where he could drive it and produce abundant gas at very low current. That's the mode we're looking for. And he ran a 1 kilowatt Honda generator. What was different about his patent? I said, this looks like the other Brown's gas type patents. Well, he had a toroidal coil underwater. That was very strange. I featured that 2 years ago on my talk. I was saying, what's the purpose of the toroidal coil? Well, the toroidal coil, when you drive it with an AC, about 20 hertz is what he did, creates electric field lines around the coil. And if you have charged water clusters, they'll tend to follow the lines. So you end up causing about 20 hertz a turbulence in the water. And we're going to see that turbulence in the water is really, really good for helping to make the gas. Dave Lawton replicated Stan Meyer's device and got it published on the web, and he's done a lot to get others involved, including Ravi Raju in India, who tried to do it but failed. Now, and I like to stress what happened with Ravi, because this happens to most people that investigate, they try it, they follow directions, and they don't get any bubbles at all. And he says, you got to condition electrodes. And so Dave Lawton taught Robbie how to condition electrodes in tap water. And sure enough, see all this rust and crud come off him as he gets them cleaned up. When the conditioning process took a long time. Took about a month, right? That is really too long, but very few people have the patience for that. But when he's done, you got this white powdery surface. He thought it was an oxide of chromium or nickel, but that's the wrong color. Those would be black. But since he's in tap water, it could be carbonates or silicates or salts. We don't know what it is. This was not a controlled experiment. In fact, the only thing you know about his water in India is that you mustn't drink it. But when he was done, there he goes. He got the success, the same success as Lawton and the same success as Myers, getting plenty of gas at very low power, 0.5 amp. So he got to that mode. Bob Boyce conditioning process was described by Patrick Kelly in his book, and he did better. He got it down to 3 days. I heard on the web that if you work with 317L stainless steel, you can get it down to 1 day, the conditioning process. Paul Zagiris got it right away. He did something different. His story is he was selling electrolyzers on the web, and he got shut down. There's a suppression story around him. He had very tight spacing on his plates. 0.6 millimeters. That's kind of setting a record. He used sandblasting or media blasting because he's hitting it with silicon carbide. And he said that the angle was very important. 45-degree angle on the plates was very important because you want to get very tight, microscopically, you want very sharp lip to the crater that the sandblasting produces. Here's a picture of a sandblaster. He produces abundant bubbles. We have time to show this, John. Let's show the bubbles that he can get. He's trying to run a car, so his goal was water in, gas out immediately. That's what he was trying for. Hey, John, we need the video. No, he's got the headset on. There's the specs on it. He liked modulating his square wave. He found if he wobbled it, he did really well on a three-way period, so he would shift the frequency, because these devices typically don't settle out at any one frequency. But he was able to convert 2 gallons of water per minute, so they say. He made a car run on it. And he got shut down. There was a suppression story, and I talked to Paul, and I asked him about the story. I actually had dinner with him in the fall. And he says, well, they kind of exaggerated in the article, but what happened was the lawyers from the Justice Department came up and says, listen, you can't drive a car on water, right? And people find out about that, they're going to short the oil stocks and collapse the economy. And I'm thinking, well, we already collapsed the economy. And we did it the old-fashioned way, with greed and stealing and fraud. What the hey, don't blame some poor inventor. Once again, the emitting surface needs to be very rough, so we're in a discharge mode, not an electron conduction mode. We want discharges, not current. Which suggests other materials like sintered stainless steel. That was suggested in the brainstorming here at the Tesla conference. That's a great idea because it's very similar to something that worked. The mixed metal titanium plates have been tried. There's no conditioning required at all. And it has the advantage of not leaching any hexavalent chromium into the water. The coating is a nice, rough, dendritic type surface naturally, but a small gap has not yet been tried. So I think this is a future great thing to try. Smack goes by the name. He's done a lot to help promote people to make boosters. He said, in the standard electrolysis, you want your anode to be, your cathode to be bare to avoid flaking, because in the harsh environment of a lot of electrolyte, it flakes off. And he added a lot of electrolyte. He has a big gap, 9.5 millimeters. But remember, he is on the paradigm of hydrogen. Therefore, the gap doesn't make any difference. And what you want is a lot of current if you're thinking you're making hydrogen. But he noticed the quality of the gas was better coming off of this. He said it was 2 times more powerful. Here's a summary of the conditioning. So with Zagouras and SMAC, we don't need any conditioning time at all. So the science has come up another notch with improved materials and improved surface. That's the #1 thing that's important to make this successful, to get over unity. Two teams have announced. HybridTech announced their success. Now, HybridTech was really just a booster company for diesels. They made a pretty good electrolyzer. They had a pretty good business going. Jeff Sokol wrote an e-book to explain Brown's gas and what's going on with the boosters to everybody. And so all of a sudden, an announcement comes out of these guys in November. They released plans that they successfully ran a closed-loop system with the Troy-built generator. It was self-running for 20 minutes on about 6 liters per minute of gas. There's the specs. They just drove the electrolyzer with DC. That was it, DC, about 30 amps. And he actually was able to get enough to power an external load. And who did this come from? Well, the inventor Steve Eaton came up with it. And he chose to team with Jeff Sokol as the business guy to try to promote this. They talked to George Weissman. He says, man, there's suppression and everything else. You guys got to get this released on the web. And when they did in November, their website came immediately under attack. Sterling Allen's PezWiki site that was sharing the plans immediately came under attack, and this is a malware attack, and they had to fend that off to finally get the plans released to the public. Now you can get them now. They has concentric cylinders, a pretty tight gap. That was pretty good of him. Here's the wiring diagram. It's basically the 3 banks in series, and then the electrode concentric cylinders are essentially in parallel in every bank. He had a tight gap. The two things fit very. Do you see how his spacer is monofilament fishing line, very tight. And guess what? That can induce a vortex flow as the gas flows up the pipe. Keep that in mind. Here's the large cell. He says the more he wants to keep it in the chimney longer. He found out it gets more and more energy. Here's a comparison of the first prototype with the second. And here Steve Eaton's going to explain, as best he can, why it's producing over unity. Remember, he believes he's making hydrogen. John. Hit John.
Okay, what do we got here? These are the terminal plates that we attach the tubes to. We have one plate that fits our squeeze insert tube, and that would fit the half-inch outside tube. And this is where we weld them onto the tubes, or the tubes onto them with TIG welding. You're over unity with this. Would you tell me what that means? The amount of energy that you put in would be unity. We're running about 210% over unity, which means we're getting about a little better than double what we put into it. You're making a pretty incredible statement. A lot of people say, you can't get more than what you put in. And you're saying, well, we are. Well, people assume that's a general rule of physics. If you make the physics work for you, we've had great successes. We'll go out to the lab. This is our test module where we wanted to originally test this. We did it in a little smaller compact version to get the numbers on it, basically to decide just how long a tube we could put. By this model, we established that about 16 inches would be maximum. This is a good example of the tube that's in our most current prototype. And it's probably going to be pretty hard to see on camera, but the clearance there is 010. The water that goes in here, 70% is converted by the time it comes out the top into hydrogen, as opposed to the 8 to 10% that we got by any other method. As the water enters the bottom and heads towards the top, it's electrolyzed. As the hydrogen is released from it, its specific gravity lowers. So the further up the tube it gets, the more release you get for the amount of electricity that you put in. As the electrolyte charges, or the water charges, as it moves up in the tube, the more water is converted into hydrogen, the lesser the specific gravity of the water. It takes less electricity to convert it into hydrogen. So by the time it reaches the top of the tube, it's taken hardly anything to convert it.
You might not be over unity here.
No.
It might take a little more energy to switch the phase on hydrogen. But by the time you have specific gravity
It's reduced, yeah.
and you get to the top of the tube,
And by this part right here, it's reduced so much of that water has been converted to hydrogen, the remaining water, its gravity is reduced and is more ready to let go of its molecule. It's easier to break it up and spend that far charge. By the time it gets up here, it's releasing up to 70% of its energy with hardly any electricity at all.
so you're saying up here is where the way
Up
over
there is where it's getting real close. Anything, by this we decided the overall length. And once we adjusted the overall length, and the one we have out on the chest bench now, by the time it reaches the top, it's converting almost 100%. Right now, electrolyte is running at 95 degrees. We haven't had any overtemp problems, mainly because we've only added very little electrolytes, taken 1 gram of KOH per gallon of water. You know, all the electrolytes we need to add to get this thing up to this kind of average and production rate.
Just click the lower button and go back to slideshow. Thanks. Oliver and Valentine announced in April this year that they did likewise. They worked with a very cheap Chinese generator they felt was only 15% efficient, yet they were able, claiming they closed the loop on the system. They work with a commercial cell in Germany, the Anton cell. This is very, very well engineered because they're able to work with a very tight 1 millimeter gap using their gasket material, and they have to be pretty precise on making these plates. And each bank produces about 2 liters per minute of the gas, and they had 3 of these. And at the 6 liters, they were able to do it. First, they tried an open loop test. They were using external power to drive it. And they say, man, we can really drive this little generator pretty good. I'm driving all these loads. And then they YouTube about 40 seconds worth of them driving in a closed loop fashion without a voltage regulator or anything else. So they had a lot of stability problems, and they cut it off after about 40 seconds because it was actually starting to go into runaway. And they said, well, we're going to improve it and then post more information later. But they need more electronics to get the drive to work. Enhancement by vibration. Omasa made a very significant contribution to gas production with mechanical vibrations on the order of 100 hertz. And he would use a parallel plate electrolyzer, and he found he could make a very, very pure form of the gas with no hydrogen in it, and thus he was able to store it under pressure for 2 years. You'll have to read the subtitles. This is in Japanese, but it's a very significant contribution to the science. John?
で振動が伝わってるために表面張力が壊れてですね、泡が形成しようとしても壊れちゃうんですね。だから泡が作りたくても作れない状態がこの現象じゃないかというふうに言われてるんですね。
これをヒントにした大政社長、水に電気を流すと白い煙のようなものが、これは酸水素ガス。普通の電気分解だと水素と酸素のガスが別々に出てくる。このガスは浸透攪拌機でないと得られない。
酸素と水素のガスがですね、元素がナノマイクロバブルになって出るところが従来のですね、電気分解と全く違うんですね。そして安全な酸素と水素の私の考えでは結合体のガスが得られると。
水素ガスは分子が細かいため、容器などに保存しても燃えやすい。しかしこのガスは2年近く同じ圧力で保存されている。大政社長は酸素と水素2つの分子が結合し、特殊な構造を作っているからだと考える。ガスの用途はまずバーナーの燃料だ。温度はおよそ700度で、火の中では低い方だが、鉄板を切断できるほどのエネルギーに変わるという。さらに新たな用途も生まれようとしている。東京海洋大学の伊藤教授、7月に酸水素ガスを用いてある実験を成功させた。タンクに溜めた酸水素ガスを燃料に小型エンジンを動かすことができた。空気の取り込み口は塞いでいる。ガスの中に酸素があるため、燃焼時に空気中の酸素が必要ないからだ。水からできた燃料のため、燃焼後はまた水に戻り、有害な排ガスは発生しないという。
非常に安定な圧力を加えても爆発しない。インフラとして整備して自由に給油でと給ガスができるような状況が作れれば、自動車の燃料として置き換わる可能性というのは十分あって、
ガスの正体を調べようと大政社長は液化を試みた。酸素はマイナス183度、水素はマイナス253度で液化するが、このガスはおよそマイナス178度で液化した。
構造はわからないにしても、新しい、地球上で水の第二の水ができた。エンジンとか発電機だとか今化石燃料に変わるものが水から作れてまた水に戻るというふうに、究極のね、地球を救うね、燃料ですよね。全ての燃料にしたい。
解明できていない部分が多い酸水素ガスだが、大きな可能性を秘めている。
Just click. Oh, thanks. Just click on the white space. Just click on the white dot. Tell them to click on the white space. Enhancement by vortex action. Victor Schauberger started water vortexes. Have you heard of him? He's famous, very famous. Lots of fans on the web, lots of things for sale. Vortex machines are available on the web. Paul Pantone has a vortex going on, right? Right through the center pipe where the steel rod is, it forces the fuel to go into a vortex. Now, wouldn't it be cool to take the two popular projects of the Tesla conference, the GEET project and the HHO projects, the water electrolyzer projects, and combine the two together for getting anomalies squared? Well, that was just done. They did it over in Germany. There's a blog formed up, and they started a group. So if you can understand the German videos, you can see their progress. And they use the EBM, Energy Builders Electrolyzer. The vortex the Beltrami Vortex is called the force-free vortex. It's an arc-type produced self-organization. It produces some plasmas. It likewise will produce self-organization in the vacuum energy itself in the quantum foam. Uh-oh, no. The force-free vortex has the curl of the vector, or the curl of the velocity aligns with the velocity, or in the plasma, the curl of the magnetic field aligns with the magnetic field. It's the natural way vortexes want to form. It's the way the vacuum wants to go. This is the going with the flow, so to speak. If you start to make vortexes, you'll start to entrain the vacuum energy to follow. It's been observed in the plasmas to form pairs, like pair production of oppositely rotating vortex filaments. They can study the filaments. They can curl up and make higher order filaments. When a vortex filament closes on itself, it's a plasmoid. They see it in the tornadoes. This is a comparison of the plasma study of plasma vortexes and the shape of tornadoes. It's a great website for tornadoes. It's probably happening in the lightning too. That's a plasma channel. So on the sun, here's a sunspot, miles long, a plasma tornado that's going across the sunspot. And of course, it's known for galaxy formation. So here's the idea, that the Beltrami vortex is the arc-type self-organizational form. It creates a macroscopic coherence in the vacuum energy. So if you work with any of the particles or any of the constituents that activate the vacuum energy, just flow it through a vortex. Whether it's ions or EVs or inert gas clusters or charged water gas clusters. So what you can do with this idea is, instead of burning your gas, dissolve it right back and take it right back through a vortex and feed it back to the reservoir for electrolyzer, and thus integrate up the energy content. And 4 degrees centigrade is the highest density point of water. That's from Victor Schauberg, that's well known in science, for dissolving the gas back in and getting the gas dissolved back into the water. So what you made was super energized Brown's gas dissolved in water. We made super energized water. And after many cycles of integration of this, you'll have a tremendous energy content of the gas in the water. And then you can take some water mist and spray it into the internal combustion engine and give the illusion that water is a fuel. So if your team does this trick and you give the demo, I hope you do a better job of getting it out to the world than this guy. Let's play the Steve Ryan video. He made 60 minutes.
For years, there have been reports that people have found a way to make a motor run on water. And for years, there have been conspiracy theories about how these backyard inventors have been paid off or even murdered. None of the conspiracies has ever been proven. And as far as the scientific community is concerned, no one has created a water engine. But now an Auckland man claims he's done it, turned H2O into fuel. So we sent Sarah Hall to investigate.
It looks like a normal motorbike cruising at 100 k's in the far north. But there's one crucial difference. This bike is apparently running on water. Water that's been modified according to a secret formula by an Auckland inventor, Steve Ryan. Is it the holy grail of fuel research?
I would say that the person that can find out how water can harness the amount of energy that it has is a crack cynic.
And it's an Auckland boy with no background in science.
Yeah, I'd say so.
It's a hell of a claim. If it's true, it changes the world.
It'll be cleaner, greener, safer. Our reliance on fossil fuels will disappear.
Put simply, water is H2O, a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. The big car manufacturers are already working hard to develop cars to run on hydrogen. They're extracting it from water and storing it in a fuel cell. It will power a motor, but so far it's been expensive and inefficient. What Steve claims to have done is keep the hydrogen in the water, and use it to power an ordinary engine. Put simply, what is it?
What we've done is actually trained hydrogen in the water to make it fire.
And you're saying, to your knowledge, that's never been achieved before?
No.
We are taken to an Auckland warehouse to check out Steve's water fuel.
And basically what we've got is just an internal combustion engine. It was a Suzuki motorcycle. It's a 350cc engine, carburetor, fuel tank, fuel.
Okay, so it looks like water.
It is. It's a water-based fuel. What we'll do is just fix it here. Yep. Yep. What we're going to do is put a bit on there.
Right, so that's need the
Let's
hole,
need the whole piece.
because we're going to test this later on.
I'm going to just slip it in here, which is the fuel tank. Then what we'll do, I'm just going to get you to stand back a moment. And then what we're going to do is stand back a bit, we'll crank this up. Maybe.
Drive around, be nice to it.
What do I say?
You saw a bike around on a water-based fuel.
People would say that you're joking.
Yeah.
It can't happen.
Don't tell it to the people. And that's it. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what someone says, it's happening.
So, it's water, you've changed the structure of the water, but you haven't added anything like there's no hidden petrol in
No,
here?
there's no petroleum, no carbons, no.
Steve Ryan says the fuel is the invention. There's nothing particularly new about the bike, apart from a simple modification of the carburetor.
These two here?
So we got an independent mechanic to check it out. Steve Mason from Albany Toyota.
Well, there's no alternative fuel supply anywhere actually, because it's all going straight into the top here. So there's, well, for one, there's no room to put anything else.
So Steve, in your experience with this bike, you've said that there's nothing unusual about it. What would you say if we said that he's putting basically water in here?
Well, without seeing it, I wouldn't believe it for a start.
One of those convinced that Steve has done what he said he's done is next door neighbour Brian Connell. He's been an engineer for more than 30 years and has watched Steve's work in progress. How sure are you that it is water?
Well, I'm pretty positive because I've seen him take the water out of the tank. He went in, he said the tank, but he says, here it is, there's the water. Mixes it. There it is. But it's definitely not octane. I mean, any octane you can taste or you can smell. Any octane, no matter what it is, you can taste it all. I'm sure it'll burn you.
So you're positive it's water?
I'm positive it's water.
Steve Ryan gave up his job in finance to become a full-time inventor. For more than 8 years, he's been tinkering with this idea, starting off in a shed at the back of his property. If he's achieved a water fuel, then he's beaten researchers all around the world who have spent hundreds of millions of dollars. How can you have done it when physicists, scientists with billions of dollars worth of funding can't do it?
It's quite simple. If, for example, I was to go to university and study chemistry, I'd be reading a textbook. So I would know what I can and can't do. But when you actually don't have that formal training, you continue going in the track of believing you can do it until you prove to yourself that it can't be done, or it can be done.
Are you potentially the next Bill Gates?
I think he's a bit light.
Bill Gates, a lightweight compared to him. So what do you think happened to this guy? Well, his websites are gone. He made it into an article from Panacea that says how they went wrong. Right? And it was a very good article, very good essay there, because they talked about many of the inventors from the last decade and how they got suppressed because they really didn't share their information, they didn't try to go open source. So in summary, the pulsing electrolyzers make charged water gas clusters. The primary energy is not coming from the hydrogen. You don't even want the hydrogen. We saw three types of clusters: the plasma charge clusters, the inert gas clusters, and the charged water gas clusters. Similar phenomena, all manifest excess energy. We introduced a reference that showed how zero-point energy coupling occurs by cavity quantum electrodynamics. The clusters retain their energy. So vortex action can increase the energy because anything you circulate helps entrain and make a macroscopic coherence in the vacuum energy itself. That motivates cycling Brown's gas to a water vortex, and it also motivates recycling the engine exhaust water. The simplest electrolyzers, things have been simplified down now. We got to make a very good surface. We found other materials that help do that, make a conditioned surface. The small gap allows us to cut back our current because we're cutting back our electrolyte. We're looking for a discharge across the gap. And the goal is, we've seen two examples, if everybody in the world, all over the world, can make a closed-loop self-running system, right, it would irrefutably prove you have a new energy source. Let's face it, that's what's required for a skeptical world because, after all, a new energy source that can't run itself is not very impressive. And so the way to do it is to change the world, to create a self-running system, simplify it, and post information on the web. And what everyone can do is simply communicate the new paradigm, communicate the possibility or suggest the hypothesis that it is the charged water gas clusters and not the hydrogen that's doing that. So everyone who's working with the booster experiments and things like that, think along those lines, and they'll start to naturally do the right thing to up the energy content where they too can make a self-running system. So with all of your help, we change the world together. Thank you. I have some books. So here's the ad for them. They're over in the bookstore. They're the first two books, and there's the third book on T. Henry Moray. Any questions? Now you can download this PowerPoint presentation as well as last year's PowerPoint presentation from that website, and all you have to do is Google water fuel ZPE, and you'll go pick the